I'm Alicia. Standing in the dark alley behind the restaurant, my whole body trembling uncontrollably, I can still hear my heart pounding in my ears. Just a few moments ago, I was sitting at a table with a man I thought was perfect, enjoying what seemed like a wonderful date. But then, everything changed. My waiter, a young guy named Leo, dropped a note with the check that said, "Leave through kitchen now." I looked up, confused, and he pointed at my drink, then mouthed the words, "Your date drugged it." My mind went blank. How could this be happening? Let me take you back a few months. I'm a 28-year-old event planner in Seattle. My parents are both retired school teachers, and they've always been very protective of me. My older brother, Jake, is a firefighter. He's the tough love type, always warning me about the dangers of the world. 6 months ago, I ended a 3-year relationship with my boyfriend, Ben. It was a mutual decision, but it left me feeling lost. I moved into a small apartment with my best friend, Lily, who's a yoga instructor. She's the free-spirited type, always encouraging me to get out and have fun. 3 weeks before that fateful night, Lily finally convinced me to download a dating app. I was really hesitant. The idea of meeting strangers online seemed so overwhelming and scary. But she sat with me while I set up my profile and promised to help me screen the matches. That's when I met Ethan. His profile said he was 32 and worked in tech. He loved hiking and traveling, and his photos showed him in beautiful places, smiling and looking friendly. We started messaging, and our conversations flowed easily. He asked about my work and my hobbies, and he seemed genuinely interested. After a week of talking, he suggested we meet for dinner at La Bella Trattoria, a nice Italian restaurant downtown. I told Lily and Jake about the date. Jake immediately went into overprotective mode and offered to do a background check on Ethan. I laughed and told him he was being paranoid. Lily, on the other hand, was excited for me and helped me pick out a nice dress. On Friday night, I was actually nervous in a good way. I met Ethan at the restaurant at 7 o'clock, and he was already there waiting. He looked exactly like his photos, maybe even better in person. He was wearing a nice shirt and jeans, and he greeted me with a warm hug. We were seated at a corner table with candles and soft lighting. The conversation started flowing immediately. Ethan asked about my event planning work, my favorite places to visit, and my family. He shared stories about his job and mentioned that he had a younger sister he was close to. After about 30 minutes, I texted Lily under the table, telling her the date was going really well. We ordered appetizers and then our main courses. Ethan suggested getting a bottle of wine, but I said I'd prefer just one glass since I'd driven. He ordered a cocktail for himself and a glass of white wine for me. Our waiter, Leo, was friendly and attentive. The food was delicious, and Ethan told a funny story about a camping trip that went wrong. I found myself laughing genuinely for the first time in months. I started thinking that maybe this could turn into something real. After our food arrived, Ethan excused himself to use the restroom. He was only gone for a few minutes. When he came back, he immediately asked if I'd tried my wine yet. I said no, that I'd been waiting for him so we could toast. We toasted to new beginnings, and I took a small sip of the wine. It tasted slightly bitter, a little off, but I thought it was just the type of wine. Ethan was watching me drink with an intense focus that made me a bit uncomfortable, but I brushed it off. We continued talking, and he started asking about my apartment, whether I lived alone, and what floor it was on. I thought he was just making conversation, but looking back, those questions seemed loaded. About 10 minutes after I took that sip of wine, Leo came back to our table. He asked if we wanted to see the dessert menu, and Ethan immediately said yes, suggesting we share the tiramisu. I agreed, even though I was getting full. When Leo sat down the check holder on the table, he made direct eye contact with me and tapped it twice before walking away. Ethan didn't notice because he was looking at his phone. I opened the check holder, expecting to see our bill. Instead, there was a small piece of paper that said, "Leave through kitchen now." I was completely confused. I looked up and saw Leo standing near the bar, staring at me seriously. He subtly pointed at my wine glass and mouthed the words, "Your date drugged it." My heart stopped. I looked at Ethan, who was still casually scrolling on his phone. I knew I had to get out of there. But when I tried to stand up, Ethan reached across the table and gently put his hand on mine, suggesting we order the dessert first. His touch made my skin crawl. I forced myself to smile and said I needed to use the restroom. When I stood up, I felt dizzy. Maybe it was the sip of wine, or maybe it was just fear. Ethan stood up too and said he'd walk me. I told him no and walked towards the back of the restaurant. I could feel his eyes on my back. When I reached the hallway near the restrooms, I saw Leo standing by the kitchen entrance. He jerked his head towards the kitchen door. I looked back at our table, and Ethan was watching me closely. I had to make a decision. I trusted Leo. I turned towards him and the kitchen. He pushed open the door and pulled me inside. The kitchen staff barely looked up. Leo kept moving, leading me past the cooking stations and the dishwashing area towards the back door. As we were walking, he pulled out his phone and asked for my name. When I told him I was Alicia, he asked if I could call someone to pick me up. I immediately thought of Jake. Leo told me to call him right away. We stepped out into the dark alley. The cool night air hit my face, and I realized I was shaking. I could barely hold my phone to find Jake's number. I called him, and he answered on the first ring. I could barely get the words out, telling him I was in the alley behind the restaurant and that my date had drugged my drink. Jake's tone changed instantly. He asked if I was safe and if the guy had followed me. Leo took the phone from my trembling hands and introduced himself to Jake. He explained what had happened and promised to stay with me until Jake arrived. While we were waiting in the alley, Leo told me what he'd seen. He'd been working as a waiter for 2 years and had learned to notice when things seemed off. When Ethan went to the bathroom, Leo was clearing plates nearby. He saw Ethan come back and stand behind his chair for a few seconds, blocking the view. He saw Ethan pull something small from his pocket and move his hand over my wine glass. Suddenly, the back door of the restaurant burst open, and Ethan was standing there. He didn't look charming anymore. His face was tight with anger, and his eyes were cold. He said I'd left my purse at the table, but he was holding it in a threatening way. Leo stepped in front of me and told Ethan the kitchen area was staff only. Ethan ignored Leo and spoke to me, saying we should go back inside and finish our date. I found my voice and said I was leaving and wanted my purse back. Ethan took a step closer. Leo pulled out his phone and said he was calling the police. Ethan's expression changed. He looked at me with hatred and said I was making a huge mistake. Just then, headlights flooded the alley. Jake's fire truck came around the corner and screeched to a stop. He jumped out, still in his uniform. He positioned himself between Ethan and me and asked Ethan for his full name. Ethan said there'd been a misunderstanding. Jake asked for identification, and Ethan hesitated, saying he'd left it in his car. Jake radioed for backup and told Ethan he wasn't going anywhere. Within minutes, the police arrived. One of the officers asked Ethan to empty his pockets. He pulled out his wallet, keys, phone, and a small bag with 2 white pills. Ethan claimed they were prescription medication for anxiety, but he couldn't show any documentation. An officer named Officer Diaz examined the pills and said they looked like Rohypnol. Ethan's face went white, and he started insisting it was all a misunderstanding. The officers asked me if I was willing to give a statement. I said yes. They also asked Leo, and he immediately agreed, providing detailed information about what he'd witnessed. Officer Diaz went back inside the restaurant and came back with my wine glass in an evidence bag. She said they'd need to test it. Jake stood next to me, his jaw clenched. One of the officers asked me if Ethan had touched me inappropriately or if I'd drunk much of the drugged wine. I explained that I'd only taken 1 small sip. The officer told me how lucky I was. Ethan was handcuffed and put in the back of a patrol car. As they were walking him away, he turned and stared at me with hatred, saying I'd be sorry. I was asked if I wanted to go to the police station to give my full statement or go to the hospital first. I said I wanted to go to the station right away. At the police station, a detective named Detective Thompson took my statement. While I was talking, she received information about Ethan. She looked up with a grim expression and told me that Ethan wasn't his real name. His actual name was Ryan, and he had a history of assault in different cities. He'd been using dating apps to target women for at least a year. Detective Thompson said this time they had enough evidence, including the pills, Leo's testimony, and my wine glass. She was confident they'd get a conviction. I sat in the waiting room after giving my statement, and the full weight of what almost happened hit me. If Leo hadn't noticed, if I hadn't trusted his warning, I could have been in serious trouble. I took a few days off work. Lily stayed with me, ordering takeout and just being there. Jake came over every evening, making sure I was safe. My parents called from their vacation in Florida, worried about me. A few days later, the detective called to tell me that Ryan was being held without bail. 4 months later, I had to attend his trial. It was one of the hardest things I've ever done. 2 other women testified about their experiences with Ryan. Their stories were heartbreaking. Leo testified clearly and confidently. The defense attorney tried to argue that Leo was mistaken, but the physical evidence destroyed that argument. The lab results from my wine glass confirmed the presence of the drug. Ryan was convicted on multiple charges and sentenced to 10 years in prison. When the sentence was read, I felt a huge weight lift off my shoulders. Leo and I stayed in touch. He's now finishing his degree in criminal justice and plans to work in law enforcement. I've started volunteering with an organization that educates women about dating safety. It took me over a year to feel ready to date again. I met a guy named Max through mutual friends. We're taking things slowly, and I've told him about what happened with Ryan. He's understanding and supportive. I still get nervous sometimes, especially on first dates. I always watch my drinks like a hawk. But I'm healing, and I'm determined to use my experience to help others. That night at La Bella Trattoria changed my life, but it doesn't define me. If my story teaches you anything, it's to always watch your drinks, trust your instincts, and never be afraid to leave a situation that feels wrong. And if you see something suspicious, speak up. You might save someone's life.